and one dead spy. Shocking unsolved crime number 14 is the assassination of Alexander Litvinenko.
Alexander Litvinenko was a former KGB agent, later an agent of the FSB, which was sort of a successor to the KGB in Russia.
After 12 years in service to his country, Litvinenko experienced a crisis of conscience. In a 1998 press conference, he publicly accused his bosses at the FSB, including one Vladimir Putin, of ordering the assassinations of Russian businessmen for their own financial gain.
This did not sit well, as you can imagine, with his bosses, and that, for all intents and purposes, was the end of his career.
Putin went on to become president of Russia in 1999. Litvinenko fled to England in 2000.
He became an outspoken opponent of Putin's and the intelligence agency.
Then, on the night of November 1st, 2006, Litvinenko fell ill. He went to the hospital on November 3rd.
He lost a lot of weight. He was losing his hair. You could see that this was a man just deteriorating before our eyes.
As he got worse and worse, the medical personnel, they knew that he'd been poisoned. At least he had all of the symptoms of poisoning, but they didn't know how to treat it. They didn't know what to test for.
When scientists finally did determine the type of poison, their diagnosis was a virtual death sentence. The former spy was poisoned with a highly toxic and rare chemical element, radioactive polonium-210.
Polonium is a very unusual substance that you don't find in the course of normal activities, but outside of the laboratory and a few industrial applications, you don't expect to see it.
Litvinenko died on November 21st. Scotland Yard began investigating his death as a murder. 27 locations in and around London were contaminated with traces of radioactive polonium-210.
They found traces of polonium in restaurants, I believe in a taxi cab. The exposure then had spread to enough degree that you could track it.
And then they found the smoking gun. Investigators determined Litvinenko met with 3 Russian men at London's Millennium Hotel on November 1st. A teapot at the hotel produced a radioactive reading that was off the charts.
I mean, how did somebody get a hold of this, and how was this, given to him?
Was Litvinenko killed by friends of Putin to silence his criticism? Or was the murder committed by Putin's enemies to discredit his administration?
On his deathbed, Alexander Litvinenko publicly accuses Vladimir Putin of being responsible for his poisoning and ultimately his death.
British authorities suspect former KGB bodyguard Andrei Lugovoy. He was one of the men Litvinenko met that fateful November night.
He did cooperate a little bit with Scotland Yard and then suddenly left the country and went back to Russia.
UK prosecutors asked Russian authorities to return Lugovoy to England to stand trial.
Even though everyone believes that Andrei Lugovoy is responsible for the murder of Alexander Litvinenko, Russia refuses to extradite this man to England.
Instead, officials in Moscow pledged to investigate the incident themselves.
In the end, a lot of people are very skeptical that the Kremlin will actually do any sort of thorough investigation into a case like this, because the last thing they'd want to do is show that a former KGB official had something to do with the death of Alexander Litvinenko.
The body of Alexander Litvinenko was buried in a lead-lined coffin in a London cemetery. The former spy's assassin remains at large.